My belief is it's very difficult to make money out of an Amazon brand now. I think the days of selling on Amazon is long gone. You need to be a bit smarter about the way that you approach things these days.
For me, certainly, there are particular products that I probably would avoid shopping on Amazon for, but that is going to be, to be honest, the kind of products that you sell.
I know for a fact that our products on Amazon convert better when...
So why do you think it's difficult to sell expensive products on Amazon?
I mean, in audio, it's shocking, really. Outside of earpods, there's nothing really huge of any value. Search results are dominated by... So difficult to get anything.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Seller's Journey podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Eddie Latham, co-founder of Velocity Commerce and Majority Audio. Welcome along, Eddie.
Hello, thanks for having me.
No worries, it's really excited to get into the conversation today. Do you just want to give a quick overview of yourself and the businesses that you run at the moment?
So I guess I spent my life selling on Marketplace, so since I was a teenager. When I left university, I got a proper job, which didn't last particularly long, and then I went back to selling on Marketplace. But even when I was at university, I spent a lot of time selling on Marketplace. But Velocity as a company started 12 years ago, so when I was in my late 20s. Initially, we were buying clearance products, so end-of-life electronics. This is in, when Amazon and eBay were in their infancy, really, so very different beasts to what they are today. But buying clearance products, end-of-life products, selling it through. Couple of years into our journey, took voluntary redundancy from our jobs to focus on the business full time, moved away from buying clearance product. Clearance is nice, you make a good margin on it, but it's very hand to mouth. You do a good deal, it sells well, you sell out, you can't get any more of it. So we want a bit of continuity and stability in the business. So at that point, we focused on a couple of things, is our own brand, and the one that you touched on earlier, Majority Audio, like I said, about 10 years ago. And then we also started to manage people's brands on various different marketplaces, and that's been various different formats. So like we ran a Lego store on eBay. Yeah, we've sold Brita water filters on Amazon, but always as like exclusive distributor or channel manager for those brands. Sometimes we purchase the stock from them. Sometimes we and act as a retailer. Sometimes we do it through like an agency capacity. But that's been a part of our business that's contracted quite a lot over the last few years. And we focused more on growing our own brand, Majority Audio. Our turnover is about 25 to 30 million. And almost all of that now is Majority. But the big transition that Majority's made over the last few years is being bought on Amazon, but now moved to being omni-channel brands sold in all the big UK retailers and some European retailers as well.
So you're kind of starting off as an e-commerce agency, developed that, got a really good understanding of the, of the kind of infrastructure of selling on Amazon and eBay. And then you created your own electronics brand. That electronics brand, was it always going to be kind of specific for Amazon? Was that the kind of initial plan?
The reason why we've always had like a two-pronged attack, so like doing retailing or agency work for brands and then also having our own brand, is partly because of the makeup of those two different businesses is very different. Running an agency is quite cash generative. You don't need a huge amount of capital, whereas running your own brand takes a huge amount of cash flow management, etc., etc. So it adds an extra level of complexity. So we'd almost use one to supplement the other. When you had a bad period for selling other people's brands, you had a brand relationship that didn't go particularly well, which does happen from time to time, and you had to clear a load of stock. It doesn't really matter because you've got all your eggs in the sort of agency type world market. So yeah, we've always just had those two things supplement each other. But in the last few years, with the growth of Majority and Majority moving away from Amazon, which was its initial focus, has meant that we've got a two-pronged attack for our own brand. So we've got some sort of redundancy and fail-safes in there because we've got so many different retailers on board now, Argos, Currys, loads of different retailers that mean that we're not so reliant on Amazon for our primary breadwinner and for our own brand. So yeah, that's why they've had that transition. But yeah, as you say, we cut our teeth learning with other people's brands, also our own brand. But in time, we've used what we've learned from that to make ourselves like a full market brand.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think this is going to be an area that a lot of brands are going to be really interested in because, an Amazon brand is a real thing, right? Like a lot of brands that kind of, starting out, the first place they go to is Amazon because it's an easy entry point. You need to throw up a listing, do a bit of market research, send your stock into Amazon's FBA. As a general rule, there's nothing that Amazon won't take. I mean, obviously dangerous goods and things like that, but if you've done your research, you wouldn't get into that anyway. So it's a really kind of easy point of entry.
My belief is it's very difficult to make money out of an Amazon brand now. And, part of our decision to go omnichannel or look at other retailers and stuff was driven out of necessity as much as it was a business vision or a growth challenge. Of course, primary Amazon brands can survive if they have unique product, is very well designed, have some sort of protection on that IP. I would argue if you have that great product, then that's probably going to do very well in retail as well as it does on Amazon. So again, why are you just only focusing on Amazon really? So I do think the two things, to win either one of those things, retail or Amazon, you sort of need to be doing both, I think, or at least have one eye on how you could potentially do both. Because I think the days of selling generic another item on Amazon and making money hand over fist are long gone. You need to be a bit smarter about the way that you approach things these days.
Yeah, definitely. So do you think that you would have been able to get into the retailers that you're into without your Amazon kind of back history?
Not at all. No, it's, even now, Amazon's such a reference point. The first thing the retail buyer wants to know if, going to, selling John Lewis, which use John Lewis as an example, and, is what the Amazon reviews are. It's a reference point for everyone. Our idea is to build this flywheel where, the different retailers and different sources of information, the shop windows that you're in is driving, a full market presence, and they all live, they're bigger than the sum of their parts. So, it's a reference point. It's, social proof for people, Go on Amazon, you see a product and you're like, is this a genuine brand? And a really quick reference point to do that is to put it into Google Shopping. And if it's sold in, to use audio products that we sell, it's sold in richer sounds, that's huge, kudos to the brand. Any retailer that survives, to use that example that I just touched on, Richer Sounds, Richer Sounds does incredibly well in audio. They're a trusted advisor in the audio space. But, if you're stocked in Richer Sounds, that adds good brand credibility. But secondly, all these retailers have their USPs, You either have a USP as a retailer or you die. Amazon's has always been breadth of range, next day delivery through Prime. But you have a look at Richer Sounds, it's extended warranty. It's that trusted advisor. You can go to a shop and they really, really, really know what they're talking about. Argos have, a huge retailer in the UK, have click and collect from, any Sainsbury's store, same day delivery. They've all got their little nuance. And they all pick up a slightly different customer. To say they're competing with Amazon would be naive to think that these retailers don't have their point of difference, whether it be Club Card, Nectar points, whatever it is. They've only survived because they're offering something different.
Yeah, and you're right. For me, certainly, there are particular products that I probably would avoid shopping on Amazon for, but that is going to be, to be honest, that is going to be the kind of products that you sell, right? The higher end, higher price points. I'm nervous about buying those on Amazon, because of the delivery schedule. I've been caught out before where I bought a set of AirPods and when they turned up, the box was empty and I literally couldn't do anything about it. Like I lost my $200.
We're talking about how do you sell stuff online, your traffic and your conversion. I know for a fact that our products on Amazon convert better when stocked in other retailers. Same amount of traffic on Amazon, all that traffic still coming through generic search. It just converts better because there's social proof out there. We also know that products that are stocked on Amazon and they say in Argos convert better in Argos because actually someone will find that product on Amazon and be like, I want to go and collect it now. Amazon don't have a facility today, so they'll go and buy it from Argos. So those two things, as I said, are bigger than the sum of their parts. If you select something a day and it gets listed on Argos, you will sell 12 of it on Amazon without influencing the Argos sales at all. It converts a lot better because you have that social proof.
Yeah, it's really interesting. How much of your retail sales do you think is cannibalization of Amazon sales?
I would say none. I would say they're all...
Really?
I would say some customers see it on Amazon and go and buy it elsewhere. Some people see it on elsewhere and go and buy it on Amazon. But I would say, all in all, everyone's conversion is better because you've got that full market presence. It helps with brand security. It helps with, product consumer trust. And not only that, I think that you get to a position like we're in. When you're an audio brand, you live and breathe by your publication reviews, your What I-Fi's trusted reviews, Tom's Guide, all these things. And actually, if a product is sold in multiple retailers, it gives the PR publications actually a bit of credibility in order for them to review your product as well. They're like this bona fide brand. Everyone's a little apprehensive of Amazon-only brands, and I can see why. So, it's a bit here today, gone tomorrow, sort of, type mentality. And I think for an audio brand selling, as you say, higher price point items, we're forever trying to reinforce that we're an established UK brand, that if you have an issue with your product down the line, we're still going to be here. The bricks and mortar, retailers quite literally buying into that, I think only helps the perception of your brand. It's very hard. It's not, you don't just take an Amazon product and walk up to Argos and, they're falling over themselves to stock your brand. You need to do this from, product conception stage when you're building out your ranges, when you're building out everything. offering. You need to have continuity between your different products. You need to have packaging that is identical. You have to have all your safety certification in place. It's a very, very long battle. So I'm saying for someone that's new into the Amazon game, barriers to entry are low, investment is low. You need to get that domino effect rolling and start to build up to this position where you are retail ready, because that doesn't happen overnight.
No. Yeah, I'm really interested to understand what your strategy was from an Amazon perspective. So when you're kind of, you list on Amazon, you start getting some really good traction. What do you do differently to get yourself ready for retail?
So even selling on Amazon now is completely different for us, because whereas initially, Amazon, you are as a brand a list of one hit wonders. Yep, I don't think there's many Amazon only brands that have a range that presents itself good, better, best. Those age old things that we talk about every day. Amazon's not like that. For a certain extent, people are buying into Amazon. That's why they buy your products. Yep, and actually the brand doesn't really hold that much value. Now, when you're looking at a retail offering, that's completely different. The brand perception, what your range looks like, etc. Because you'll very rarely get one product into a retailer. Yet they'll buy a range of products, or they'll buy complementary products, like for us, a turntable and a set of speakers that look like a family that work together. So you need to think about more like the ecosystem that you're building, the brand that you're building, and you really need to ask yourself, what are people actually buying when they go to retail? The simplicity to use a product that demos very well when it's on a shelf. And the packaging contains, on Amazon, you sell via your A+ content, your images and stuff. When you're looking at a retail offering where you're only a box on the shelf, that has to be your full content stack. Yep, that box has to be your A+, your bullet points, your images. Some retailers don't even display the products. They just put the box up. So that has to tell the customer everything they need, what the product looks like from every angle. Just having black and white packaging is never going to cut the mustard. So you really need to think about all these things. And I guess getting your brand retail ready when you don't have those retail sales is actually quite an expensive journey. You could argue some of the things that we're doing for Amazon already, like, making some visual content, making some renders of product and stuff, retailers are byproducts of that. There's no extra cost of repurposing them really for retail. But some things, you do have to invest quite extensively in order to get your product range and your products retail ready. But you need to be thinking about this at like brand level and a range level, not just individual products like most Amazon sellers approach their business.
Yeah. So it feels like, this isn't a natural next step from Amazon, right? You could be doing really well on Amazon and then, look at wanting to get into retail, but then there's, it's almost like a complete switch of strategy.
It is, but I think what I was quite oblivious to, as someone that spent their whole life working in e-commerce, someone that was young at some point, relatively recently, for me, e-commerce is everything. But I think that different demographics, either social or, different age demographics, shop differently. And while I was oblivious to the volumes that some of these retailers can do, I look at the traffic on Amazon, I look at the traffic on Tesco's website, let's use that. We don't sell on Tesco's, but you look at traffic on Tesco's and you're like, okay, well, for electronics, for example, the traffic on Tesco's is clearly a lot lower. I think the difference is that on Amazon, it's really difficult to get a slice of that huge pie. It's very difficult. It's difficult to get a slice of the sales. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get a consistent slice of those sales. And then it's even harder to make a profit. Now, when you're looking at a retail offering, there's been some wins in those retailers far bigger than we actually ever anticipated. Yes, take Tesco's for example, their pie is a lot smaller, but you can get a pretty meaty piece of that pie. And Amazon, where you're always scrapping for a small piece of the pie. But there's been some wins in things that, are a little bit left field. Like in Argos, for example, your sales are relatively consistent, way more consistent than you would be in the likes of Amazon, definitely, because someone's running a promotion on Amazon, they're undercutting you, whereas Argos's range is relatively small. So you sell the same every week in, week out, within reason. It's consistent. So that means that forecasting is a lot easier. Forecasting on Amazon is almost impossible. You end up with loads of stock, you end up paying loads of storage, you end up clearing out overstocks. Whereas, yes, the gross margin of selling to a retailer is low, but there's so many less chunks to come out of it because it's consistent and reliable and known quantity business. Whereas Amazon moves like the wind changes direction.
So how much of your business now then, if you're looking at majority audio, how much of your business is still on Amazon versus how much of it is retail?
3 years ago, it was 100% Amazon. This year, we'll do more in retail than we do on Amazon.
Wow.
Our Amazon in that time is up about 30%.
Wow. So you're still increasing on Amazon, but your retail sales so you basically doubled your revenue in the last 3 years.
most businesses, as they get more established, my business is 12 years old now, you go through evolutionary periods. You don't change a lot. It takes ages. It takes a generation in order to take a chunk out of that. It moves very slowly. I think that particularly, I look at our early days of launching Majority, and we thought we were God's gift to e-commerce, but I think we were less entrepreneurs and more surfing enthusiasts, because I think we were riding the wave of e-commerce just going through the roof. We thought we're turning into wine, but really there was this migration towards Amazon, and Amazon was increasing hugely. Whereas I think that for the first time in a long time in our business, we've got huge opportunity for growth. And I think we can actually go through a revolutionary period now when we unlock retail and we push on to really seeing some hyper growth again that we haven't done since before COVID, if I'm honest. So yes, Amazon still increases via a very, very small amount. I think that coming back on to what I touched on earlier is if you tracked our brand direct traffic, which is not just a result of having products in retailers, efforts that we're doing into PR, having more established ranges, selling more products, doing some above the line advertising and stuff. We have a look at our brand direct traffic on Amazon, it's going through the roof, because we just appreciate that generic search on Amazon is dominated by really, really cheap products, and that is cascading all the time. And if we ever want to make what we would consider to be reasonable margins, we're going to have to improve our product range, get some brand traffic, get some backlinks into our listings and stuff. And then retail is a huge component of that. And those two things can coexist really, really nicely together.
Yeah, that's really cool. So how much of your Amazon growth do you think is down to the fact that you're in a retail store? I'm assuming you would see an increase in brand searches, like branded people physically searching for your brand.
We don't know where that's coming from. As I said, you're investing heavily in PR. All the time we're getting hi-fi awards, mentions, features on products and stuff, which, you looked at our range 4 or 5 years ago. That was never going to happen because the product just wasn't of a quality that those publications would ever be interested in. So we've done a lot of work within that. But, our gross margin is bigger than it used to be. But, some PR efforts and work comes out of that and stuff. In time, you want to leverage your experience. I think that before we were leveraging our Amazon experience to make some money, and the whole world caught up, and works out how Amazon works. And there's agencies that can help you and stuff. So it's really difficult to monetize that experience these days in the same sort of way. So focused on our experience and our knowledge of building quality products, basically. And now we're leveraging that. We know about market positioning. We know where the sweet spots are on products. We know exactly what the competitors' products are doing, literally inside and out. We've got a workshop here full of products either that we've bought, competitor products and samples that we're working on. So our product development cycle is huge. Extensive now. It means we can really find that sweet point in that gap in the market where I think we can leverage a position and a profit and hopefully out of that. But this is not like a go to China, throw up in an exhibition hall, stick a load of stuff in your suitcase and bring it home. This is like, calculated range building and trying to spot a gap in the market truly through product, not through being able to leverage your Amazon experience, basically.
Yeah. So really interested to understand audio, right? Audio is my background as well. I've worked in brand distribution and it's really kind of condensed. There's a lot of brands that are trying to break out of the, kind of the unknown into the known. It's unbelievable. And you don't really see it until you kind of get into the industry, how many different brands there are out there trying to push their products, and a lot of the products look very similar, and there's a lot of kind of repetition in style. How did you get through that and get your brand to really kind of stand out? Because I'm assuming you had to do that on Amazon first before you could kind of move that into retail.
So traditionally, we've always tried not to focus on your fashion type products, in audio. So by that, I mean, your headphones, etc. Because, the headphone market is dominated by a couple of really, really big players, Apple and Beats company is the obvious one. And, they occupy a huge chunk of that market. So I guess we started on a slightly older demographic. So looking at like your bookshelf speakers, your radio hi-fi type products, which is generally, you look at the brands that occupy that space, they're not, hugely fashion focused products. So, they're judged on the audio quality as opposed to, a badge being on side of something. Because, with all the will in the world, we're not going head to head with Apple and winning that contest anytime soon. We don't have a sexy shop on every high street, and all the rest of it. So I'm trying to focus on those more niche categories, to try and carve a name for ourselves and think we can offer quality and value that is unparalleled. But, I've always been very obsessed in my role now, predominantly on product development side. And I think understanding the market and the positions that those products and prices need to hit, and just being a little bit more agile than some of those, pre-existing brands that maybe, looking for one product to sell worldwide, whereas we make one specific for a territory and then might hit a certain price point or a certain feature set and stuff. So got to be a little bit creative. The beauty of the audio market is so vast. We're talking about 1% and 2% equal a turnover of hundreds of millions. So time we've used as we built up our brand, I guess we've focused more on, the sexy end of the audio market. So perhaps moving away some of those niche products with a view to looking at the brand that we've built and how we've developed our product portfolio, how we've built up this PR flywheel in order to try and unlock some of those key and more fashion-led areas. But we're far from finished yet. It's a building process, but, we want to stay true to those audio products that we know, and we can design and develop, good products within those space.
So you essentially then you're looking, or you're kind of specifically targeting a demographic that wouldn't necessarily compete directly with the likes of Apple, in the headphone space, like fashion-led. People want AirPods because they look cool.
Whereas your Apple ecosystem, people aren't buying them because they sound good, because I could write you a list of headphones you can buy for 50 quid. They sound the same. I know that they're not buying them for that reason. We all know that. If you are, if you're honest with yourself, it's either because they like the seamless integration with their iPhone. 50% of the smartphone users in the UK approximately are iPhone users. So I can't compete with that. For all the will in the world. So I'd be foolish to try that, really. So I think there's other categories, that it's a bit like, when the Koreans entered the car market, they're not pitching themselves against Rolls-Royce. They started, with that family, the family box and offering value. They've released sub-brands, that, operate slightly higher. And, we're doing similar in a way. We come up with a market segregation strategy where we can have a brand majority, which is focused on retail, and then trying to bring in a value-driven brand that can refocus on Amazon to try and, have our cake and eat it. Because I think the days of selling anything remotely premium on Amazon are getting much harder. So
yeah, why do you think that is? Why do you think it's difficult to sell expensive products on Amazon?
I mean, in audio, it's shocking, really. Outside of AirPods, there's nothing really hugely that sells of any value on Amazon, because didn't you say barrier to entry is just so low? I think search results are dominated by volume, not by value. PPC, I'm sorry if I'm talking about things that people don't necessarily understand. Yeah, PPC, does help a little bit to try and, drive some higher price point sales. But I just think with a search engine that's, and Amazon is essentially a search engine for products that is ranked by, the number of units that you sell, so difficult to get anything, which is why we focus on a brand direct strategy, because I think it's the only way you're going to get products over the line. They're anything other than lowest common denominator or sold at a loss, or, someone's cheating some system somewhere, is to get some brand direct traffic. So, we dream of a position where most of our sales come from brand direct, which I don't think is outside the realms of possibility. It just takes a long time to build it. But I think the value within that brand then is, huge compared to, a set of products or range that is driven by generic search. I think that touching back on our heritage of brand management, we can see from our early days of managing, the big brands that we used to manage, that all of their sales are coming brand direct. It's a huge battle to try and take on. But I think that if your aspirations are out, beyond a couple of £1 million turnover and running a relatively lean operation, and that being a USP, then, you need to break that barrier of producing brand direct search and sales. It's imperative.
And then in order to drive that brand direct search, how important is it for you to kind of understand the demographic and understand the type of person that's going to be buying your product?
Huge, because I think that we've wasted a huge amount of time and effort on, social influence and stuff, which, is a huge buzz at the moment. But I think unless you understand your demographic and your customer and what actually pushes people over the line, in audio, we don't have any reoccurring income. We're not, Dollar Shave, we're not putting printers into people, so there isn't that lifetime value in the customer in the same sort of way. Of course, there is brand perception, but for us, it's, someone buys a majority soundbar 2 years ago, they want to buy a radio for their mum, they search on Amazon, they find a radio, they buy that radio because they know and love the brand from old. I think that understanding, who your customer is, how your buying cycle works, I think is so important. I can appreciate that, but if you're selling makeup, for example, I can imagine social influencers are huge. In audio, maybe there is some gap in the market there that you can really deliver a lot of sales through social influence or adverts, etc. But for us, that's definitely not the low-hanging fruit. For us, it's that social proof of PR, the publications, people's reviews. I think that you have to ask yourself that, let's talk about audio brands across the market, is, one of the nice things, but the difficult things about audio is if I said to you, what does £100 worth of sound like? It's very difficult to answer that. Whereas I said to you, spec me a £500 laptop. Yeah, but you can say, oh, well, the screen's going to be like this. It has this much RAM. You want a hard drive of this size, a processor of, an whatever it is these days. It's really easy to do that. So that's on a spec sheet, whereas audio is not like that. It's it's not as tangible. It's almost an intangible value. So this is why those reviews and publications saying people that are in the trusted advisor of what a hi-fi saying, you know what, for 100 quid, this is bloody good, is what we have chosen to focus on because we believe that to be what most people are looking for. Whereas I think we're all a little bit now, if it's an influencer, of course there's the big tech, influencers who, if you can get your product on there, it's going to sell loads, it's traffic driver and going to help you conversion, etc., etc. But yeah, not necessarily the products that we're selling. For us, it's those traditional publications that really, we believe, make the difference.
Yeah. And I think, with my experience in audio, the tricky thing that I always found was just the influx of products that could be deemed as similar to yours, but a lot cheaper, so you try and, we keep talking about headphones. It's a tricky market, we know, but if you try and sell a set of wired headphones that you can now get for, I don't know, £5-6, there's going to be someone out there that's going to be knocking them out for £2.50. So who really cares if you're buying a pair of £5 headphones or £2.50?
But, you look at the brands that have hugely successful in headphones, Marshall, let's just use that as, a recent comer to the brand. They've got huge, brand is beautiful. It's got heritage. You need that. Ultimately, our strategy at Majority is to win the headphone market. I'm talking about win 1% of the UK headphone market, let's say. But we know that's the end game. We're not going to do that by sourcing some headphones now, redesigning them, whatever. We're not going to be able to do that now because we don't have that brand presence. You don't walk past, you don't go through Curry's and there's 3 different stands in Curry's and Majority. There's one currently selling party speakers, doing very well, lovely. But I think in time, when people go to an airport and they see a Majority Bluetooth speaker stand that they've walked past in every single airport they've been to for the last 3 years, at that point is the tipping point that you can make headphones work. Because I think without that, you're just a generic headphone. No one knows what they sound like. You can't even try them on in the shop. Amount of social proof in the world will help, but it won't be enough. So it's a tipping point. It's a domino effect that we know to jump through in order to get that over the line. But I completely agree with you. Another brand of generic headphones that look like all the other ones, 2 peas in a pod, almost quite literally with TWS these days. So difficult to get that to work. You've got to have everything in place to win that. And my God, is that a battle? If you win, will it pay dividends? You look at your average pair of £100 retail headphones. You're talking about £10-12 to source them. But they're much astronomical if you get this really difficult jigsaw to add up, which, let's be honest, you can write a list of 5 brands that have ever made that work ever, on wireless headphones, maybe a couple more. But yeah, it's so difficult. And, one thing that always leads back to, on any of those headphone brands that have made it work, is heritage. The Sennheisers, the Sonys, they got decades of audio heritage behind them.
Yeah, interesting strategy that I've not really heard of that before, about kind of categorizing your strategy almost. So the headphone market's going to be tricky. In order to win in the headphone market, you need a really reputable brand. In order to get a really reputable brand, you need to make sure that you're targeting the right kind of niches and building that brand heritage. What I find really interesting about that is that you're almost following the kind of sale life cycle of a standard audio buyer, right? Because when you're young, you either want to be really cool and you want to have headphones that look cool and you really don't care what they sound like, or you just want something really, really cheap because, you just want something to chuck in your ears while you're at the gym. Yeah. And then I guess as you get older, you start to appreciate, the quality of something a little bit more. So I guess, I'm kind of guessing that your demographic might be a little bit older than perhaps the people.
You do that through color, usability, whatever it might be. Yeah. There is, even within headphones, there's some cute little niches, that still do all right. I'm not saying something that we'll pursue. Our vision is very much to continue to topple categories one at a time until we can unlock some of those large categories, or we think we've got the brand heritage in order to go toe to toe with some of these established players. But, there is niches within everything that can work. Recent one, open ear headphones from people like Shocks. Shocks, new to market, have come in and created a brand doing hundreds of millions of pounds a year by chopping the end off a couple of pairs of headphones, for all intents and purposes, starting with point conduction, now with open ear. That is clever, hugely clever marketing, finding that position and stuff. But, that comes from having an associate, why are people buying them? Because they're associated with all the running clubs, because they've got really, really nice assets, because they've got some IP within that. Some of the technology and the drivers within those open ear headphones from Shocks is completely protected. It's that is a very, very, very long battle. But, to use them similar to the Apple analogy, they're 150 quid and people are queuing around the block to buy them. Get them for less than $20. Absolutely. But, I've got a pair, so I use them to go running in, and I think this is a fantastic product. And to be honest, quite happy to be ripped off because it's a really, really well-polished product with huge brand affiliation. And I always feel like, that makes you feel like a runner if you've got a pair of Shocks. It's like, I'm going to do sport. I've got the right tool for the job, and that is branding 101. That is absolute beautiful setup they've got there. They managed to take a huge market in headphones and go, well, actually, we're only interested in the people that are genuinely, runners or fitness focused people using them for this particular application. And they've absolutely dominated that.
It's really clever, isn't it? 'Cause it is a huge market. And I know that, my dad's a keen runner. He's got a set and he swears by them. He wears them everywhere. Like, even if you're out for a family walk, he's got them because, they're open ears, so you can still hear everything going on. And it's like, it's a huge differentiator. But I also think it's taken years to catch on, right? Because when I remember the first time I saw or heard about them, it was weird.
If you're going to build that, it needs to be protectable, yeah? Because if you're just going to try and create a market and then someone else can copy you, you're a little bit, you are leaning really, really heavily on brand then, which, they have done that and also they've protected that product. But yeah, if you just expect to release another brand of headphones with generic branding on it and win, then even if you take JLab, for example, brand that I love, they have really delivered on that value headphone proposition. But they have done that with a pretty, very well put together range that ticks a lot of boxes, has good, better, best, really nicely packaged. They've got an association with Man City. They've got New York, MLS. They've got that in abundance and still offering value. But they've gone, okay, well, we know to win this value, we've got to be the biggest brand in the world. Like, got to stick some money down, like a big wedge to get some of these brand accreditations or brand affiliation. To sweat that hard enough to make it worthwhile, we've got to have, our fingers in all the pies. You've got to have Argos on lockdown. You've got to have all these different people. So there's definitely people that do it with, the value end of the market, but they're not just rocking up and expecting to win. They're investing huge sums of money, which you can do, but you can't do overnight. You've got to have it in term plan and strategy. I just think it's nice now for us as a company and a brand that we have an opportunity to grow with these retailers, whereas trying to squeeze more out of Amazon, as much as we wanted to grow and stuff, was never going to deliver, the sustainable growth that we're looking for at the point. So this change in direction for us, focus more on product, look at our product life cycle and our product range and how we grow that over the next 5 to 10 years to really deliver the numbers that we hope we can is exciting for us.
Yeah, it sounds mega. And I think what's been really great about this conversation is that it almost feels like you are bridging the gap between an Amazon-only audio brand that are just kind of seeing themselves as an Amazon-only audio brand because they're never going to be as big as JBL, they're never going to be as big as Bang & Olufsen or Apple or any of those. So they're comfortable in this little kind of Amazon world. They're making good money, they're good turnover, good profits, all the rest of it. But I think, bridging that gap and seeing a brand like yourself kind of making that move and actually having the strategy in place to be able to say, right, actually, in order to grow the way we want to grow, staying on Amazon just isn't going to be sustainable with the growth targets that we've got. So we have to move away from it and building that kind of strategy and having all these things whilst on Amazon, because let's face it, without Amazon, none of this would be, none of this is remotely possible, right? So you have to have that solid strategy. You have to generate the revenue so that you can then, get yourself in.
It's not only going to help Amazon anyway. So, I mean, for us, I think for any brand to exist on Amazon, you need an off-Amazon strategy. That could be a retail strategy. That could be a PR strategy. That could be a social strategy. I think that if you don't have that, then you're just another product. And I think that it's so transparent now, Amazon. Helium 10, has been around for years and years and years. For someone to replicate that, unless you've got something you can protect or something outside of Amazon that helps you as you're on a hamster wheel the whole time, I don't think that's ever going to be a sustainable long-term business. So partly our long-term approach was driven by a necessity in order to survive in the ecosystem that we were working in. But yeah, I mean, it's like anything. It takes a long, long time to build a proper brand. And I think that for me personally, the longer it takes, the more satisfying it is. I think, I'm at a time in my life and our business journey now where that long-term approach and the level of money and time that we can invest in the experience that we've gained throughout those years is good timing to try and do that. But, it's a long sustained, like I said, 5-year plan really in order to get that over the line.
Yeah, amazing. And I think it's been I think it's going to open a lot of eyes when people listen to this that are kind of the majority of the people that are going to be listening to this are going to be Amazon sellers. What would be your kind of parting advice for brands that have listened to this and thought, well, actually, I think I'd really like to devise a strategy to get myself from Amazon into retail? Like, what your main advice for those brands?
I would ask yourself what you're actually buying, because I think a lot of the time you're not buying the product, you're buying something else or some sort of affiliation of try and reverse engineer that. So even, you go to John Lewis, to use that as an example, premium UK retailer. I think when you go there, you're buying something that is guaranteed to work, comes with a nice warranty, is going to work straight out the box, simple to use, all the products that are arranged in there, from whatever they are, kitchen utensils right through to electronics. They're well polished. They look like a range. They've got a nice website behind. The packaging is multilingual, all those sort of things. The product is part of that, but it's the full product offering. You need to make sure you're working through ticking off every single one of those things so you can become that person. If it's a brand that's only selling because it's got Kim Kardashian's name on it, then I guess your answer is to find another celebrity. But, if there's products that are there, that are selling well, let's take kitchen stuff, Le Creuset, that's a beautiful, well put together. It doesn't have a Le Creuset logo on it. You pick it up, it's Le Creuset. It's got the heritage, which you might find it hard to replicate, but you might be able to make a better product. And of course, like always plays a point. If you don't have the heritage, then you need to bet your bottom dollar that you're cheaper. So, trying to build up a position that is a retail buyer and also the consumer find it hard to argue that it's a good offering. But, how well that's polished is so important when you're selling in retail and there's higher price points.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I could speak to you all day about this. It's a really interesting topic, but conscious of time. And obviously you're a busy guy, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. How can people kind of, get in contact with you if they want to?
LinkedIn's a good way. Yeah, I'm often spouting similar nonsense on there. So yeah, it's a good way to keep in contact or keep up to date with what I'm doing. And if anyone ever messages me and stuff, I'll always reply to everyone unless they've emailed me 15 times to tell me something and they haven't even explained what it is. So yeah, but anyone genuinely, even if people that have used our products message me, it always makes my day. So always happy to chat to everyone.
Eddie, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And yeah, obviously wishing you all the best and thank you very much for all of the insight you've given. It's been incredible.